At what he said there matters. The president was meeting with the Prime Minister, that is Narendra Modi, and according before he left there, the talks are focused on strengthening ties in critical sectors, while including the signing of memorandum of understanding between the two countries, and of course focusing on capacity building, education, ICT, maritime affairs, as well as renewable energy. Let's now have a look at that.
An engagement on all the issues that are of mutual significance and importance between our two countries. I have congratulated Prime Minister Modi for successfully hosting the G20 and for successfully championing the cause of the African people, the 1.4 billion people in our continent, that today, because of Prime Minister Modi's engagement and championship, the Africa Union is now a member of the G20. I have also congratulated Prime Minister Modi for his leadership in the Global South and for summoning us in the Global South to the Voice of the Global South Summit that I was privileged to attend virtually. As has been said, we share a common heritage and we share a common history, connected by many years of relationship. The first Indians to come to Kenya came in 1911. That is more than a century ago. And up to today, they have participated in Kenya in many fields, in finance, in business, in farming, in agriculture, in health. And we want to commend and thank the Indian community that came to Kenya. And because they have become part and parcel of our nation, I want to report to you that in 2017, all the Indian nationals that are in Kenya were made Kenyan citizens. Today, Kenya is no longer their second home. Kenya is their first home. And we celebrate them because they are a great people and they have created a bridge between Kenya and India.
Well, let's now take a short commercial break. We'll be back with more. Cafe, and of course you can interact with us at TV47 News on X, TV47 Kenya on Facebook. The hashtag is Morning Cafe. But let's now have a look at this interview that Fred Indimuli had earlier on.
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Cafe on TV47 with me, Fred Indimuli. We now want to get down to the headlines on State of the Nation. Interesting headlines, but very common across all dailies today. That issue of the arrest and arraignment of the Control of Budget, Margaret Nyakango, making it to the front pages of most of the most of the dailies today. The other big story is the issue of courts and the kind of judgments they've been giving on plans by government. So we'll be looking at that and a lot more with my panelists this morning. We're privileged to have Harun Isaac Hassan, governance expert in studio. Good to have you in studio, Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Also with us this morning, Javas Bigambo, governance expert. Good to have you in studio.
Thank you so much.
Gentlemen, a lot has been happening, but I know there's also a strike by members of parliament. We'll come back to that later. But before that, of course, there's the biggest talking point from yesterday, and it is this arrest and arraignment of the Control of Budget. And you could see the uproar on social media with regard to the timing of this kind of action. But justice must be served in cases of wrongdoing, and one wonders, are we wrong in asking questions when someone is arrested? Bwana Hassan, let's start with that.
No, I think, good morning everybody. I think it is important to know that when a Kenyan is accused of certain issues, definitely justice will be served. Taking someone to court does not necessarily translate to being guilty. So we know Margaret will going to defend her case. But the reason as to why it is appearing on the newspapers, there is the headline, or the reason as to why social media is picking it up very critically, is because Controller of the Budget had a conversation with the bipartisan talk panelists last time, and of course poked some holes in what is going on with our budget within the ministries, as well as putting a clear point on how some money, some of the budgets are being over budgeted, including her salary, and of course some state officials' salaries have been over budgeted. Then subsequently this happens, and there is a cause to worry, because we are used to kamata, traditional way of kamata on a Friday evenings in Kenya, which was instigated by politics. We may not say this one is instigated by politics, but the way it has been crafted, or the way it has been addressed, looks like after she has exposed critical issues within the government budgeting system, then she's been taken for a case that was back there in 2019. And therefore, as much as we will not want to dwell much on things which are in the corridors of justice, because she has her own right, and of course justice will going to be served, but definitely there is a cause for alarm for all Kenyans to think that something is not adding up. Therefore, I think the bottom line is that as she proved her case, is it that the government will want to push her out of her office just because she exposed some of the things that are very critical? You remember there was a statement which was made by leader of ODM or opposition, and he mentioned that it is something that we were just waiting when, not why.
Okay. And Javas, Kenyans have a lot of faith in the judiciary and the processes that will happen in the courts. No one is questioning that. But many are questioning the timing and whether or not this arrest and arraignment is intended to slow down this control of budgets, newfound style of exposing government excesses publicly. Do you feel that, do you agree with Bwana Isaac Hassan that we are still in that phase where instruments of a criminal justice system can be used to slow down people or to target or for corruption to fight back?
Thank you. First, I must tap into the pronouncements of the most recent history by the president when he was campaigning. And he said that given how they were buffeted by the winds of witch hunt and the utility of certain state organs for purposes of political manipulation and torture, that when he ascends into high office, he will not pursue that path. That statement itself is quite encouraging. Secondly, some matters we know do not suffer the constraints of the statute of limitation. And such matters, for example, as presently is facing the control of budget, Dr. Nyakango, do not fall within that bracket. And that's why you are saying that a matter that initially was raised as a complaint in 2016 now has caught up with her as it's been put forth by way of her arraignment yesterday. Additionally, I would say that by the canons of natural justice, one is presumed innocent until adjudged guilty by a competent court of jurisdiction. Now, her path within the corridors of justice has just commenced by way of her arraignment yesterday, and she did not plead guilty. And now the matter is going to be in court. We are not going to go into the merits of the matter because of the sub judice principle. But as a matter of fact, we must agree and embrace the hard fact that within the canons of the principles of natural justice, it is important that justice must be blind to anyone regardless of status or tribe, just as much as accountability. The fact, for example, that one is a state officer and has found herself or himself, brushing with the law, then such person, the law must take effect. Now, there has been the political contours that have been navigated from the time of her arrest yesterday. I have noted, of course, with concern, curiously so, how the people, various legislators from the Kisii community have come to her defense. I think the control of budget, Dr. Nyakango, is safer under the protection of the rule of law than under the protection of ethnic bigotry. Yesterday, in fact, I was baffled by the sentiments of some of the legislators saying that it is the president who is after Dr. Nyakango. Now, really, when you look at it, the issues that are alleged to have been committed by herself and 9 others, or is it 10 others, are things that happened in 2016. 2016, William Ruto was not the president.
And that's not the issue, really.
Yes.
It's not about what happened in 2016.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, you ask about the timing.
Yes.
Well, really, and that's why I talked about the issue of the statutes of limitations, does not apply in these circumstances. But as a matter of fact, let's also face it, that it's possible we may want to understand from the investigative agencies why it has had to take this long for this matter now to be brought to limelight. It is not anything to do with her suitability. Much as we may recall petition number 235 of 2019 by the so-called notorious, or I would call him the incomparable litigant, Okiya Okoitio Mtata, now Senator for Busia, questioning the merits of her appointment on the basis of Article 228 of the Constitution, Article 73 of the Constitution, Article 10 of the Constitution, as well as Section 7 of the Public Appointments Parliamentary Approvals Act of 2016. Now, when you examine the entire furore around Dr. Nyakango and her arraignment, I think we must come to a point where we should say that timing should not necessarily matter. What should matter should be integrity, justiciability of issues, and objectivity, and certainly not political witch hunt.
Yes.
No, I think it is important to recognize. It's important to recognize the case itself, and of course the timing, because when you look at the case that was before the courts, which was charged on her, I mean, these are things that does not require long-term investigation. It's not rocket science. It is a simple case with, operating an illegal circle. Identifying that is just dealing with the second arm of the government and ask, is this circle registered? No.
But there's no requirement that justice or such a matter has to be dispensed with in a certain period, is there, in our laws?
Of course, cases
if at all new evidence emerges even years later, justice must be served.
I totally agree.
Yes.
The justice, so long as the criminal is alive, there is no crime that is old. We totally agree with that, and we are in that concept. But look at the milestone of how events have unfolded. So if events unfold in a different way, and particularly touching on the government, and you are a state officer, and then all of a sudden, things which would have been unearthed while you are still a state officer with no much, issues with the government system that you have flagged off, then means we are targeting the whistleblower. I mean, sometimes it looks like our targets are not very...
It's a very dicey discussion to have, but the balance between justice, where crime is committed and justice has to be not just served, but seen to be served, vis-a-vis claims of witch hunt and whether or not this could have other underlying issues, Javas.
I would find solace in the quip by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that time is always right to do what is right. If at all it is within the mandate and satisfaction of the investigative and prosecutorial authorities that this matter now should be presented before the courts, I mean, really, by all means, let it be taken to the courts. What I shudder at is the situation where we may find ourselves presently heretofore, where we are getting into the storm of politicization of constitutional and independent offices. If at all, as now the twist has taken, the issue of now parliamentarians coming in to allege political witch hunt and ethnic witch hunt, etc., that now it's the kisses that are being hounded out of office, I think that is now a very slippery and dangerous path. In fact, where I sit, the politicization of constitutional commissions and independent officers itself, in my view, is assailing the Constitution. I am an originalist. I believe that there must be proper wisdom and objectivity in going back to the root, the original thought as to why the framers of this Constitution determined that certain officers should be independent. And by way of politicians trying to meddle into affairs around these independent officers itself is spitting at the very original thought of the framing of this Constitution.
Okay. And because the matter is already before court, we'll leave it to the courts to determine the matter. Of course, public sentiment will continue as it should. But allow us to move to another story, and it's interesting. It's featured on the front page of the Daily Nation on the top strip. Striking MPs paralyzed sitting over CDF delays. They walk out to demand release of 53 billion shillings. Now, there were interesting scenes, and Taifa Leo puts it interestingly. On the front page, the big headline is Sokomoko Bungeni. Yes, Sokomoko Bungeni, given the kind of, okay, fine, probably light-hearted jostling there and scuffling as MPs try to block the majority whip from accessing the chamber. Now, this issue of CDF, because MPs have over time always claimed that this is not a big deal, and the only involvement we have when it comes to CDF is in our role to oversight government projects as well at the constituency level. But 2 days before their scheduled Christmas recess, you see how deeply entrenched and how important, how vital CDF is to these MPs. It is the only thing they seem to be to agree on across the aisle. Don't you think that this probably, the NGCDF, because yesterday, There was another, in the dailies, there was a story about this bill, about Conflict of Interest Bill 2023, which would, if passed, would bar members of parliament from discussing anything to do with the NG-CDF. Don't you think that sometimes the CDF and the fact that MPs are involved in the CDF dilutes the role of parliament, and they tend to focus more on these funds?
CDF has remained a political tool on the ground where MPs use CDF money to manipulate their supporters. This has been from the beginning of the time when CDF was introduced. We know very well CDF is unconstitutional. That has been proved in many of the courts. And now, in the recent talk, you remember one of the things that they said is that this has to be put in within the Constitution, or it has to be, an act has to come that will go into, massage and purify the CDF process that has been in the corridors of court. I know very well MPs have their role as a legislature, representing people who have elected them, but CDF is not part of it. Their role will have been an oversight, if at all there is anything to be done. They are going on recess, and one of the targets that they have, we speak from the ground. We understand how CDF is being used. This is the time that they are going on recess, and this is the time they want to go and reward their political supporters with few contracts as they break and go to their constituencies to provide, to interact with their constituent. Therefore, it is unfortunate for lawmakers to first strike in the August House, because the August House is supreme. It's where laws are being made, and we respect anyone who represents us in that house to behave in a more, civilized manner. The other thing that we expected is that as a lawmakers, they were supposed to, craft their own way of, establishing laws or acts that will going to protect the CDF. They didn't do it. So if they want to rely on the national government to give them a favor or threaten the executive mandate in terms of supporting their policies, just because they have failed to replenish them with the CDF money for this quarter, then it's unfortunate, because that is a way of bargaining, using a bargaining power. It's like workers who come out, demonstrate, and fight for their right, just because that's the only way they are able to communicate.
Yes.
If they fail to do it through the normal routine procedures that are in place within an institution. But again, unfortunately, the way our lawmakers have behaved, it's not a very good reflection for the country, because if you see social media, how they have articulated the behaviors of our members of parliament, striking, the word being used, striking. Striking is not a very good word for people who we know have been taken there to represent everybody. Mm-hmm. And if our children and other people who are within the country view parliament behaving that way, then I think every person in this country, as much as we say you have the right to demonstrate, I don't think if that is applicable to members of parliament. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate that from where I sit, with the move that the members of parliament have done in paralyzing the sitting is unfortunate.
Okay. But there's something to be said about something that has already been declared unconstitutional by the laws. We are yet to entrench CDF in our laws, yet it would appear it is the main role of parliament now, that members would rather not legislate or represent, but have CDF.
Well, Mr. Ntumuli, I would say that we must be the better angels of logic and sobriety. And in so doing, we must find great courage and enthusiasm in the pronouncements of the Supreme Court, when it adjudged CDF Act 2013 as unconstitutional. Because, and as the ratio of that decision with the Supreme Court held, that members of the August House are actually accountability holders. Mm-hmm. They play oversight roles. You cannot play an oversight role as you play an implementation role at the same time. Mm-hmm. They argued that, and that's why the CDF Act 2015 right now is still in abeyance in the courts, that they are only standing aside as patrons of the said fund. But if at all they are mere patrons, why are they pushing for it in the manner that they are doing it with such unmatched agility? It tells you that there is some sinister move and interest. In fact, like biblical David, parliamentarians are using the CDF as a rock in the sling against the Goliath that their opponents are, just as he has indicated. And that's the most unfortunate thing. In fact, just yesterday, I learned and I saw, perhaps all of us have, it should have been reported in one of the dailies today, that members of the Nairobi County Assembly are angling to impeach Governor Johnson Sakaja on the basis that he has not released bursaries. And now because of that, bursaries, remember schools are closed, that because they have not released bursaries, the county has not released bursaries, the county executive, he should be impeached because he's not releasing bursaries, executing his mandate, and the city is not clean, according to them. Now you see already, members of county assemblies are learning from members of parliament that you can use this fund as a political tool for hunting and hounding an executive out of office. That's what a number of MCAs are doing against governors, and that is a very weak link. Now, as we are discussing all this, remember that the report of NADCO is yet to be deliberated by Parliament and endorsed or otherwise, or amended, whatever. But remember that one of the recommendations in the NADCO report is that CDF Act should be entrenched, NGCDF should be entrenched in the Constitution. There should be the SIGNET Oversight Fund entrenched in the Constitution. Then the Ward Development Fund should be anchored in law.
Even the National Government Affirmative Action Fund,
yes,
GAF as well.
I mean, why are we playing Russian roulette with the issue of oversight and accountability? If at all, we find wisdom in the decision of the Supreme Court on the CDF Act 2013. In fact, I would say this. There is no better example. While these funds are novel and quite critical, and in fact, other countries have come to our borders to learn this concept, no other country has got the legislators playing an implementation role and oversight at the same time. That is some creature akin to a political hermaphrodite.
But probably it's that creature that we need. Probably because that is our understanding as a country, that probably that serves our needs better than the other roles prescribed for the members of the National Assembly. We'll discuss that after the break. Remember, you're watching Morning Cafe on TV47. Do stand by and be part of this conversation on TV47 News on X and TV47 Kenya on Facebook.
Indeed.